Alright men, it's time to teach those Lannisters a lesson!
Attack! Surprise!
Why?
As they say, the betrayal is coming.
Winter! Winter is coming, you idiot!
It doesn't matter, you're not going to see the winter.
A Game of Thrones!
The board game,
Digital
Edition, is a fantasy military strategy board game where you can play tutorial, challenges, skirmish, and online PvP up to 6 players. Tutorial is divided into 3 parts and it's going to give you basics. Then there are challenges, 10 challenges in 4 different houses out of the 6. And the main mode is basically the skirmish, because that's where you play against computer. And all of these modes consist of 3 phases: the Westeros phase, planning phase, and action phase. But you like Game of Thrones and you played more of it, so you should keep explaining it.
I will. So those 3 phases are pretty simple. In the Westeros phase, you get 3 cards from 3 different decks that tell you what is going to be the environment in the world at that time. Things like you can't defend, or the wildlings are getting more powerful and might be attacking. The planning phase is the interesting one, where you can give 5 different types of orders. That is consolidate power, raid, move troops, defend, or support. And those are hidden from the other players. So this is interesting that everyone kind of prepares all of their actions, but it's all revealed at once. And then in the action phase, you play them out one by one, depending on the order that is determined by your political power and your position on the Iron Throne and for different political elements. This looks a lot like a typical kind of global domination game. On the surface, it looks a lot like Risk, for example, where you just move troops and you try to take more territory. But it's much more complicated than that, because the battles are not just mathematical. You can't just calculate, I have more troops than them. There's a lot of other factors and surprises, which is consistent with Game of Thrones, because if you know about the story at all, you know that you never know what's going to happen next and who might suddenly get betrayed or backstabbed.
And the game is visually pretty simple. You can see just the map, and if you attack someone, it will be really short, just icons and good sound, good music, but very simple.
There are a couple of things that do keep you guessing and balance off all the military elements. One is that the wildlings north of the wall steadily gain power, and when they attack, it affects everyone on the map equally. No, actually not equally. It depends on how much you try to stop the wildlings and whether you are heavily or lightly affected by the wildlings' attack. So that's kind of like you're all fighting the different houses, and then suddenly there's just this natural disaster that you all have to try to work together while you're still enemies and killing each other. And the other thing, of course, is the alliances. You will not survive unless you make alliances with the other players. When you're playing against a computer player, this is kind of mechanical, but when you're playing with human players, this gets much more diplomatic and nuanced and tricky to try to agree on things.
And I think you can already see that this game is quite complex as a board digital game. But the question is, should you play it?
But first, you should know that this game is free from the Epic Game Store the week of June 23rd. You have 1 week to claim it and keep it forever. And that is what we do on this channel. We review every free game from the Epic Game Store so you know if it's worth your time. Make sure you subscribe so you never have to be bored again.
We got quite a few board games already on Epic Game Store for free, so we can compare. And I think we can both agree that it is always better to play a board game with friends physically, not digitally. So I can see how people who played it together and now are distant friends would enjoy it together, because it's basically the digital version. I think it's got a good music, good, simple but good visuals, but it doesn't talk to me because I'm not into Game of Thrones, and it doesn't make me play it as itself. So it's not for me, but because I'm not a fan of the digital board games in general and Game of Thrones.
I am a big fan of Game of Thrones. I'm a big fan of board games, usually not a fan of digital board games. This one actually engaged me more than most of them do. The tutorial was pretty easy to follow. I would say it was the right balance of like walking me through and forcing me to learn it. But still, when I started a real game, I got my butt kicked, like badly. So for me, the measure of a board game is it should be simple to learn, difficult to master. And I think this is the case. Now, the fact that it is a digital version, I think takes a lot of the value away from being an excellent board game. Because there is such a big social element of this game of just kind of talking and making nuanced, careful agreements with each other and saying, hey, like if you don't attack me now, then next time we can get them. That's not possible even if you're playing with other human players through the computer, because there's just not the mechanic for that unless you're all on a voice chat on another program. So this means that if you're a huge fan of Game of Thrones, you might enjoy playing one of the houses and having some of these challenges. If you're a huge fan of board games and you want to play with other people who are far away, this might be the way to do it. If you're on the fence about this, you cannot think of this as a video game. It is just a digital version exactly of the board game, and that's all. So unless you're a huge fan of Game of Thrones or board games in general, I'm going to have to say no as a video game to this.
If you are wondering why we are reviewing these games that we are not a fan of, it's because we review every single weekly free game from Epic. So stay tuned and hope to see you next time. Bye.
Bye. And in general, I would say no to this video game. Try that again. Wow, what the fish?